All right, welcome back. I'm here again with Jason Phillips. He is a nutrition wizard. I have a question for you, Jason.
Let's do it.
What is the best diet for CrossFit?
Let's start with what the best diet is not.
Okay, so what are some of the worst diets?
So the most popular diet in CrossFit is paleo.
Paleo.
Right? And so CrossFit got in bed with paleo like circa 2007. It's caused almost all of the problems that we see today.
Whoa. So you're saying
and so paleo, a lot of people are like, holy shit, like that's crazy. That's blasphemy.
So you're saying paleo is a terrible diet for CrossFit?
Yes.
Wow. Why?
So CrossFit, as we know it, and as it continues to evolve, is probably one of the most intense, if not the most intense, training modalities that exist, right?
Totally.
On a day-to-day basis.
100%.
You know, people go there for that intensity, to sweat, to lay on the ground after workouts, right? And fundamentally, scientifically speaking, it's glycalitic exercise, right? First of all, that's fueled by carbohydrate. Like, that is the appropriate fuel source for that activity. So then you get paleo, which is predominantly, you know, meats, nuts, fruits, vegetables, sweet potato, right? There's no one in the planet that's going to eat enough fucking fruits, vegetables, and sweet potato to fuel that exercise. And so when you start looking at that fundamentally, that's creating a lack of recovery. So now you've got stress and you've got adaptation. You're continuing to pound yourself with stress, and you're inhibiting, because of a lack of recovery, your ability to adapt. And so the way your body adapts is other physiological adaptations, metabolic adaptation, decreasing thyroid output, decreasing hormonal output, ultimately leaving you in a state with reduced thyroid output and HPA dysfunction.
And you see that, actually, it's actually not that uncommon. I've had quite a few people come to me from the CrossFit world who are very competitive, who did very well for the first year or so eating a diet like that. And then all of a sudden hit a wall and they eat otherwise healthy and follow a paleo diet. And so what you're telling me that's happening is it's just not enough, what, carbohydrates in the diet?
It's really not enough starchy carbohydrate.
Okay.
You know, when you look at
and the studies support this.
The studies absolutely
This is not just your opinion.
No, this is not conjecture. And again, I mean, at this point, I've worked with literally thousands of CrossFitters.
Okay.
From CrossFit Games athletes, like I had a team on the podium last year, to mom and pop that just got into CrossFit yesterday. You know, and like you said, when people initially get into CrossFit, they eat paleo and it works. It's because they're creating neurological adaptations, right? Their brain is what's adapting. They actually don't need any significant amount of physical fuel to fuel the exercise or to recover from the exercise, because they're not digging deep enough into their nervous system.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second. So when you're talking about the neurological adaptations, we're talking about the central nervous system.
Yes.
And this is an example that I like to give all the time on the show. Your central nervous system is very much like an amplifier. Muscles are very much like speakers. You could have these big, powerful speakers, but if the amplifier is weak, broken, fatigued, whatever, it's not going to put out 100%. Much sound. And when you first start training, a lot of the, and for those of you watching right now who started lifting weights a while ago, you remember those Newbie GAINS,
those
right?
are the great days.
Yeah,
I miss those days.
The first 6 months of training, you seem to get stronger all the time.
No matter what you do.
Yeah, and you're not building muscle that whole time. It's a lot of it is just your CNS learning the skill of the movement, learning how to fire the muscles a little bit more efficiently. And so what you're saying is, in the beginning, when people are seeing all these results, most of it's that.
Absolutely. I mean, think about CrossFit. Even if you've been to like Gold's Gym or Orange Theory or any of these things, right? You're not doing snatches. You're not doing clean and jerks. You're not doing any gymnastics-based
Those are very technical movements.
They're very technical lifts. Dude, I've done CrossFit 4 years. I still suck at snatching, right? Like, and a lot of it's mobility-based. A lot of people lack the mobility to get into these positions. So you're not only learning to, you know, produce force from a different manner, you're learning to get into new positions, and it's so much mental work, right? Now all of a sudden, at some point your brain figures that out, then you actually have to have fuel to physically do it.
Now you're looking for that muscular adaptation.
Yeah, well, or your brain figured it out and you're doing it to a degree that's far greater than you were those first 8 months. Now you also need recovery from that.
Oh, that's a great point.
Right? So your nervous system becomes like you become a little more efficient within your nervous system, right? So at the top level, the longer you've been doing anything, the deeper you can go into it, right? So you remember the very first time you did a bench press, you really couldn't make it hurt that bad. Now you probably got really sore because it was the first time your muscles were exposed to that movement, but you really couldn't make it burn. Now if you go in and I was like, dude, 135 completes a failure, you're gonna fucking go to almost absolute failure because you're very efficient in your nervous system. You're gonna be able to drive very deep. But because you can drive super deep into your nervous system, you're necessitating an exponentially higher amount of recovery. And if you're not treating that recovery, carbohydrate, then you're going to start regressing.
And for those of you that may be shaking your head and disagreeing, a simple experiment, you can actually get your central nervous system to fire stronger right now. All you got to do is drink a cup of coffee. The reason why you notice you're stronger right away isn't because that caffeine from the coffee built more muscle. It's because it amped up your central nervous system. This is the same thing that happens when you hear those stories of the 145-pound mom who lifted the car off their kids because the car was on fire, whatever. That's your CNS putting out a lot of juice. And so that's what's happening through that adaptation, but you need those carbohydrates for the muscle.
That's an amazing reference, right? Because what happened there? She released a shit ton of cortisol, right? She went very sympathetic into her nervous system. But what if you asked her to repeat that right away? She couldn't do it, right? A, she's not going to get the same nervous system response, but B, she's just used up a significant amount of that cortisol release, right? So again, what would she need? I mean, potentially, there's no amount of fuel that's going to fuel that, right? But she certainly needs to fucking recover from that, because she's going to sit down on the curb and be like, holy shit, like what, like days, like what just happened? And there's going to be a significant amount of recovery that's involved in that.
Now, what about people who say, well, your body can operate off of ketones. Ketones will make you move and perform.
Yes, it absolutely can operate off of ketones. It cannot fuel glycolitic exercise with ketones.
So it's just not ideal.
It's just not going to work. And honestly, so here's the fundamentals of CrossFit, right? It's very, like we talked about, going deep into your sympathetic nervous system. What happens is when you begin exercise, your sympathetic nervous system response kicks in, cortisol elevates. Cortisol allows the mobilization of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats as fuel. Unfortunately, when you're done with the CrossFit workout, when the clock hits 0, your body internally, your nervous system doesn't know that the clock just hit 0, right? And so what happens? Cortisol remains elevated. What's ultimately the shutoff valve on cortisol?
Insulin?
Insulin. You're not getting that shit from proteins and fats.
You need carbohydrates.
So you need to shut off that cortisol response. Otherwise, what happens if cortisol remains elevated for a prolonged period of time? It's taxing our HPA, right? So in a situation where day in, day out, you're only taking in proteins, fats, you're relying on those ketones to fuel you. Yes, you can initially get by on it, but over time, your HPA is going to be burned out because that cortisol is going to have been elevated way too long. And like we talked about earlier, cortisol is not glucose. You can't just drink a shake and replenish that shit, right?
You need those carbohydrates.
You need those carbohydrates to shut it off and to basically become, to rebuild it over time.
Now, in some circumstances, ketones may be okay for good performance, and I'm thinking long, low intensity, steady state type movement.
Yeah, like Volek has put out some studies that show, ketogenic diets and the body's ability and dependency on ketones as fuel in aerobic exercise. And I would agree.
So like if you're going like long distance hiking or walking or slow,
even very slow running, like even, and I would actually argue marathoning is close to aerobic threshold. And I actually think, there are studies that show that ketogenic diets have been sufficient in marathoning. I think that I would love to look at the hormone profile of those people and see if their HPA was ultimately fucked up. Like I don't think that was ever talked about. But if you actually start looking at science and physiology of the body, when you get close to aerobic threshold, carbohydrate is used for fuel more than fat. So I would argue that those that are doing very intense marathoning at the highest levels should be supplementing with carbohydrate.
Should have some carbohydrates.
Yep.
Now, because you're very entrenched in the CrossFit world, like you said, you've coached thousands of CrossFit athletes.
Yep.
The top athletes, when you're talking about the top performers, what percentage of them would you say are doing pure paleo, and what percentage of them would you say are adding the carbohydrates?
Here's the best statement. So it was 3 or 4 years ago at the CrossFit Games, Dave Castro put his hand up the night before the CrossFit Games at the athlete dinner, and he said, "Who here follows a paleo diet?" How many do you think raised their hand?
None.
0.
Wow.
Not a single CrossFit Games athlete is eating the paleo diet.
Wow. So
I worked with Travis Mayer 2 years ago at the Games. Anyone that wants to know what he ate, openly and honestly, every single night we had a burger and fries. Guys, he's doing 3 workouts a day, maximal intensity, leaving nothing in the tank, 5 out of 7 days. It's calories.
He needs it.
You have to replenish that shit. Now, people are gonna be like, well, that's fucking bad for you. No shit, it's bad for you. So is doing 3 workouts a day, 5 days out of 7. Like that fundamentally is fucking bad for you. Yeah. The reality is we're not looking at health in that week. Now, what people don't see is after the games, we go through a health phase. We go through a GI regeneration phase. We go through a hormone rebuilding phase.
Wow, that's great.
Nutritional periodization. But when you're in season, when you're in an activity, motherfucker, eat.
that's
like, that's it.
And I've never heard that term before, nutritional periodization. But that's absolutely brilliant. So if somebody's watching this right now, they're a CrossFit, weekend warrior athlete, the average person who likes to do CrossFit, wants to improve their performance, and they also eat a paleo diet. What could they expect from increasing their starchy carb intake?
So ideally, it's going to increase their calorie intake for most, which is probably going to put them into a range where they're eating enough calories finally. Most people are under eating. So they're going to increase better. They're going to see better recovery. They're probably going to see some fat loss. They're going to see themselves sleeping better. And ironically, by eating more and eating more starch, they're going to see an increase in hunger, which is indicative of an increase in metabolic function.
Will they notice improvements in performance, and how quickly will they notice this?
I would argue within 2 to 3 days.
Wow. All right. Well, there you go. So if you're a CrossFit athlete and you're eating a strict paleo diet, eat some starches or more starches. Don't drop your calories. Bump them up a little bit.
Yep.
And as Jason is saying, and by the way, he knows what he's talking about. Like, again, he's coached some of the top athletes. Within 2 or 3 days, you'll notice some increases in performance.
And we're not saying donuts and Pop-Tarts and shit like that.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you very much.
We're talking starches, right? So people that are out there, they're not like, this guy said burger and fries. Like, no, like the majority of our diets are composed of rices, potatoes, oatmeals, things that are quality, nutrient dense. Not that rice is nutrient dense, but like you're always looking for the highest quality food you can get.
Not super processed food.
No.
I'm very happy you said that because I know people at first were watching this were like, oh, cool. I'm gonna go eat 10 Pop-Tarts.
Oh, cool. I FYM, bro.
No, don't do that. Look, if you have any friends that do CrossFit and are also paleo, or if you just have paleo friends, they would love to watch this video. Share it with them. Also, subscribe to this channel. We post new videos all the time.